Tell your man from Cicero that the safety report he filed was a mistake. We know his name. We know yours. The next incident won't involve a truck. A stranger's voice, flat and unhurried, cuts through a Chicago kitchen at midnight. And in that single moment, the CEO realizes the mechanic she let change her tire 3 weeks ago just became a target because of her. But to understand how one ruined blind date in a quiet Italian restaurant could end with a death threat at midnight, we need to rewind 3 weeks. Back to the empty chair a single dad was seconds away from walking out on. He almost left. That's the part nobody talks about. He'd already folded his napkin, pushed back his chair, felt it scrape against the hardwood floor of Monteverde on West Monroe Street. 35 minutes. He'd waited 35 minutes. His jaw had gone tight somewhere around minute 20, and all that sat across from him now was an empty chair and a glass of water gone to melted ice. His name was Mike Harlan, 35, a mechanic and tow truck driver out of Cicero, Illinois, a town that never made it into any travel guide, where the alleys smelled like motor oil and somebody's grandmother's Sunday garlic bread. His hands were rough, the kind no soap ever quite got clean. He wore the one white dress shirt he owned, ironed that morning on the kitchen counter. His ironing board had doubled as Tyler's art table for 3 months. Still draped in a dried macaroni rocket ship, he couldn't bring himself to move. He looked out of place here. He knew it. But he'd come anyway, because his neighbor Darlene, who'd known him since before Tyler could walk, and still brought over tuna casseroles on the nights she worried he hadn't eaten, had told him with the gentle firmness only a woman in her 70s earns, "Mike, you have got to try." So he had tried. Haircut at the barber on 59th, ironed shirt, 45 minutes on I-290 in a truck that smelled of transmission fluid no matter what he did. He'd sat down at a corner table in a West Loop restaurant, warm with candlelight and fresh pasta, and waited, like a man who still believed, against his better judgment, that something good might still be possible. Then 35 minutes had passed. He raised his hand for the check. That was when the maitre d' appeared at his table. Her name was Rosa. A small woman in her 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the composed, seen-everything look of someone who'd worked the front of a busy restaurant for 30 years. She had 2 little girls standing behind her, 5 years old maybe. Identical faces, identical brown eyes, identical winter coats, one red, one navy, buttoned to their chins. The one in red looked straight at Mike, serious, unblinking, the kind of certainty only a small child can manage. The one in navy had both hands wrapped tight around her backpack strap, eyes on the floor, lower lip tucked in, the way a child's does when she's trying hard not to be afraid. Her mother called ahead, Rosa said quietly. "Sitter emergency. She's 10 minutes out. I've had them at the host stand with crayons, but..." She glanced at the girls, who were studying Mike with that frank, evaluating look 5-year-olds haven't yet learned to hide. "They asked if you were Mike. I thought perhaps..." "Of course," Mike said, before she could even finish. He was already pulling out the empty chair. Something shifted in Rosa's face, small, warm, quietly approving. She said she'd bring apple juice. The girl in red looked at the empty chair, then at Mike, then back at the chair like she was double-checking the math. "Are you Mike?" she said. "My mommy's sorry. She's late." "I am," he said. "And that's okay. I'm not in a hurry." He pulled out the second chair. The girl in red, Sophia, announced her own name in one confident breath, the way kids announce things they consider essential. She sat down right away, already decided he was safe. Her sister, Isabella, sat slower, watching him the way a small animal watches something large and unfamiliar. He asked if they were hungry. Sophia said yes. Isabella said nothing. Her eyes just went to the bread basket. He passed her the bread. He didn't sigh, didn't check his watch, didn't reach for his phone. He just sat there with 2 small girls eating bread and drinking apple juice, asking Sophia about her coat. She told him red was her favorite color. Isabella's too, actually, but they couldn't both have red, so Isabella got navy. And that was fine. Isabella looked up at him then. Just for a second. Something in her small face loosened, shoulders dropping half an inch. The first creak of a frozen window in early spring. Somewhere in that second, Mike Harlan stopped thinking about leaving. But what happened when the girl's mother finally walked through that door and saw the empty table that wasn't empty anymore? That's the part you won't see coming. She walked in the way a woman walks when she's spent her whole life apologizing and finally gotten tired of it. Quick steps, shoulders forward. Already composing her exit speech in her head, Catherine Bennett, 33, CEO of Bennett Logistics in Chicago's West Loop. One of the few women under 40 running a mid-sized freight company in Illinois, though she never led with that. Charcoal blazer, silk blouse, brown hair pulled into a bun that took 4 minutes and looked like 40. A line between her brows that hadn't been there 3 years ago. She'd left the office at 7:15. The sitter canceled at 6:48. She'd called her sister in Elmhurst, straight to voicemail. She'd loaded Sophia and Isabella into the SUV at 7:34, called ahead to Monteverde, and told herself the whole drive up Lakeshore Drive that this was the last time. The last blind date. The last attempt. She was done. Her plan was simple. Apologize, collect the girls, leave. Maybe stop for coffee on I-290 if she was lucky. But the table wasn't what she expected. Mike Harlan was sitting with her daughters. Her 5-year-olds, the ones she'd left helplessly in Rosa's care for half an hour. And he was listening. Not scrolling his phone, not watching the door like a man counting down the minutes until his obligation ended. He was actually listening to Sophia explain, with both hands gesturing and considerable narrative detail, the plot of some cartoon Catherine couldn't place from across the room. Isabella was eating bread. Calm. Relaxed. Catherine stopped mid-step. Her breath caught somewhere in her throat. Isabella was never calm in unfamiliar places. Not since her father died 2 years ago. She'd developed a quiet anxiety since then. It showed up as held breath and a backpack strap twisted between small fingers. Catherine had read 3 books on childhood grief, enrolled her in art therapy on Madison Street, done everything she knew how to do. This man had passed her the breadbasket, and somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. Catherine reached the table. Mike stood up. Actually stood the way her father used to stand when her mother walked into a room. "Ms. Bennett, good to meet you. I hope you don't mind, I ordered them juice." She'd come braced to be judged. She always felt it coming, the way you feel weather in an old knee injury. The preemptive flinch against a look that said, "You brought your children. You're late. This is who you are." There was no such look on his face. None. She sat down, and for the first time and longer than she could honestly remember, she didn't know what to say. Sophia carried the conversation for the first 20 minutes, which suited everybody fine. The kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Flores. The classroom goldfish dispute that had been simmering since October. The current state of her shoe-tying skills, mastered in bunny ear method, the other way still in progress. Mike listened with the patient attention of a man who'd spent 6 years as the primary audience for a small child's monologues. Long since stopped pretending it was anything but one of life's reliable pleasures. Catherine found herself watching him more than she meant to. He wasn't what Joanne's description had prepared her for. "He's a mechanic, Catherine, but he's a good man. Give him a chance." Joanne had said it the way you'd say, "The soup's a little salty, but it's homemade." Catherine had smiled and said she would. She had not particularly believed herself. But there was something in the way he talked to Isabella. Quiet. No pressure. No forced eye contact. No artificial brightness. She couldn't stop noticing it. He mentioned his son, Tyler, not as a story about himself, but as something warm, held out simply, no strings attached. Tyler went through a phase, he said, where he didn't want to go anywhere new. About a year after his mom left. He'd stand in the doorway and just look, assess, make sure it was okay first. Isabella's hands, wrapped around the backpack strap in her lap, went still. "What did you do?" she asked. Quiet. Her first full sentence all evening. "I stood in the doorway with him," Mike said, "until it felt okay." Catherine looked down at the tablecloth, pressed her lips together, swallowed hard. Then, quieter than she meant to, "His mother left." "Walked out when he was 4, Mike said. No bitterness in it, which somehow made it harder to hear than bitterness would have. "It's just us now. Has been for a while." She looked at him for a second. Then, carefully, testing the weight of a door before opening it even a little. "I missed a window a few years ago. A career move. I've wondered about it sometimes." She didn't say more. He didn't ask. Just nodded. The nod of a man who understood some stories get told in their own time. He reached for his water glass. She would think about that nod later. About how rare it was. Being heard without being made to explain yourself. The dinner ended warmer than either of them had planned. They said goodnight in the underground garage beneath the restaurant on West Monroe Street. Catherine buckled the girls in, turned around, stopped. Her left rear tire was flat. Completely flat. 9:30 at night, 2 drowsy kids in the back seat, gray concrete pressing in on every side. Mike had already crouched beside it, running a hand along the sidewall. "I've got a jack in my truck," he said. 15 minutes. She reached for her purse. "Let me pay you." "No." Not rude, just clear. "I've got it." She stood in the cold garage and watched him work, methodical, quiet, no complaint, no performance. And she thought of a night on I-90 back in October of 2018, 7 months pregnant with the twins, left rear tire blown in the rain. She'd called David. He said he was in a meeting. She'd changed the tire herself, lug wrench slipping in her wet hands, crying quietly so nobody driving past would see. She had not cried tonight. She had not needed to. What she felt, watching him work, wasn't simple gratitude. It was more disorienting than that. The specific vertigo of receiving something she'd quietly stopped believing was even available to her. Like finding a letter she'd written to herself years ago, and discovering everything she'd once hoped for was still possible after all. She didn't tell him any of that. She said, "Thank you, Mike," and meant it with her whole chest. He said, "Drive safe," and meant that too. Mike drove home on I-290, heat up, radio low, city lights thinning out into suburbs. He thought about Isabella's hands going still when he mentioned the doorways, about the weight in Catherine's "thank you." Not breezy, not reflexive, something old underneath it. He thought, she's been holding everything together a long time, and she's been doing it alone. Then, because he was Mike Harlan and not a man given to dramatic conclusions, he thought one more thing. I hope someone eventually holds it for her. He had no way of knowing, driving home through the January dark, that 3 days later his phone would ring at midnight, and that the answer to that quiet thought would arrive in the most dangerous way imaginable. Mike changed her tire without a word, without a sigh, without asking for anything back. And it undid her more than anything had in years. Has a small act of kindness from someone you barely knew ever changed something in you? The call came at 12:18 a.m. Mike had been asleep 40 minutes. He knew because he'd checked the clock when Tyler climbed into bed beside him. An old habit, left over from the year after Tyler's mother walked out, when the boy used to wake up nightly calling for someone who wasn't coming back. He drifted off with his son's warm weight against his side, the furnace ticking, the alley outside quiet under 3 inches of fresh snow. His phone lit up the room. He answered before the second ring. "Mike?" Catherine's voice, controlled but just barely. The kind of control that takes real effort to hold on to. "I'm so sorry to call at this hour. I have a truck down on I-290 just past Austin Boulevard." The driver's stranded, and I can't reach my repair service. I know this is... I'll go, he said, already reaching for his boots. Mike, you don't have to. You didn't ask, he said. I volunteered. What's the plate number? He wrote it on the back of a grocery receipt. Tyler's crayon drawing of either a dinosaur or a very enthusiastic dog on the other side. He was out the door in 4 minutes. I-290 at midnight in January had its own kind of quiet. The amber highway lights made the snow look like old newspaper. The wind came in sideways off the flatlands, finding every gap in a coat collar. Mike pulled the tow truck up behind the disabled semi near Austin Boulevard and left his flashers running orange against the dark. The driver, Russ, 50s, tired-eyed, was stamping his feet on the frozen shoulder. He'd been there over an hour. Engine just cut out, Russ said. Temp light was fine, oil light fine, then nothing. Mike got underneath with his work light, and then he stopped moving. He lay there in the cold for a long moment, flashlight tracing along the undercarriage, feeling something that had nothing to do with the January wind, and everything to do with what he was looking at. The oil feed line hadn't failed. It had been cut. Clean. Precise. A 1/4-inch gap, edges too smooth for a stress fracture, too deliberate to be an accident. Made by a steady hand. One that understood diesel engines well enough to calculate exactly how many miles the truck would run before the oil pressure dropped below critical. Far enough from the depot to cause real disruption. Close enough to a populated corridor to make sure the driver would get found. He checked the fuel return line, found a second cut, smaller, harder to see, unless you already knew to look for it. Same blade, same care, same intent. This was not a maintenance failure. This was a message. And it had been sent by somebody who knew Catherine's routing schedule, knew which truck, knew which night. Mike lay in the dark under a sabotaged semi and understood, with total clarity, that he was now the only person alive who knew what he was looking at. And being the only one who knows something dangerous, that's its own kind of exposure. He slid out from under the truck, skin prickling against the cold air, and looked at Russ. Kept his voice easy. Fuel system issue. I'll tow her in my shop. Should have her road ready by 7. Why don't you wait in my cab? It's warmer. He got Russ settled, hitched the semi. Worked the rest of it in that practiced silence of a man who's learned to keep his face calm when what's underneath it isn't calm at all. At 2:15 a.m., he made 2 calls. The first went to the Illinois State Police non-emergency line. He reported recovering a disabled commercial vehicle near Austin Boulevard with what looked like a mechanical anomaly requiring a safety review. Gave the plate number, his shop address, his name. It was the minimum legally required. But filing a full sabotage report at 2 in the morning, no documentation, no context, that would put Catherine's company name into an incident record before she'd had a single chance to prepare. He'd give her that chance first. The second call went to Catherine. I've filed a routine safety report on the truck with ISP. I'll have it road ready by 7. But I need you to come in before your team gets there. I found something. A pause, longer than a simple one. She was reading the space between his words. How serious? She asked. Serious enough you need to see it in person. A beat. Then, quiet, not elaborating, not explaining, just saying it the way a person says something they've been half thinking for weeks now. This isn't the first strange thing this month. He filed that away. Lock your doors tonight, he said. Mike. Good night, Catherine. He hung up and sat on his metal stool in the cold shop. The fluorescent light above the workbench buzzed faintly. Outside, the alley sat white and still. He pulled out a spiral notebook, 3 for $1 at the Walgreens on Cermak, and wrote down everything. Every measurement. The exact location of each cut. the technical signature that separated sabotage from honest failure. A diagram of the undercarriage with the damage points marked. He worked with the care of a man who'd learned, somewhere along the way, that the record you keep in the quiet hours is what protects someone when the loud hours finally arrive with their consequences. Then he made a cup of Walgreens brand instant coffee, the kind kept on the shelf for long nights, and sat with it in the cold shop and let himself think. There's a kind of person who helps, not out of obligation, but because walking past something wrong is simply inconceivable to them. Mike had spent years being underestimated for his job, his address, the calluses on his hands. Character, it turns out, doesn't live in a zip code. He thought about Catherine saying, "This isn't the first strange thing this month," about the flat tire, about a woman who'd spent years managing everything alone, who had stopped expecting help without a price tag attached. He thought, someone has been cutting her lines for a long time, long before tonight. He thought, that stops now. Catherine showed up at the shop at 7:15 with a real coffee from the place on Cermak Road. Not gas station coffee, Mike registered that, and he handed her the spiral notebook without ceremony. She read it standing beside the truck in the January morning light. Her breath made small clouds. Her expression went very still, the way faces go still when they're absorbing something the mind isn't quite ready to accept. "Someone did this," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "To one of my trucks?" "Yes." "Who?" "I don't know yet." Honest, steady. "But whoever it was knew your routing schedule, and those cuts were too precise for improvisation. Somebody familiar with your operation planned this." She held the notebook with both hands, knuckles whitening slightly around the spiral edge. This woman who'd made payroll in a hard quarter by cutting her own salary first, who'd filed David's death paperwork without letting anyone see her come apart until she was alone in the car. She stood in the cold morning outside a mechanic shop in Cicero, and for just a moment, the CEO expression slipped. "I thought it was just bad luck," she said. "Sometimes it is," Mike said. "This time, it isn't." She tried to hand the notebook back. He shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "You'll need it." A beat, then, "Why are you doing all of this?" He thought about it honestly, then answered the way he answered most things. "Because someone should." She drove back to the West Loop with the notebook on the passenger seat, his answer turning over in her mind like a coin. Because someone should. Feeling that particular unfamiliar weight of being cared for by somebody who wanted nothing back. What she didn't understand yet was that the notebook wasn't just evidence of one act of sabotage. It was the first thread of something much bigger. A story reaching back years before the trucks, before David's death, into a corner of her life she'd never once been allowed to see. And that thread, once pulled, wasn't going to stop unraveling on its own. 7 days later, the whole thing cracked wide open. It started on a Tuesday. Not one dramatic moment, but 4 phones ringing at once. By 7 a.m., 3 of Bennett Logistics' newest trucks had failed across 3 separate routes in the Chicago Metro. By 8, a 4th stalled out, leaving the West Loop Depot. By 9, Catherine stood in the company garage at 1200 West Carroll Avenue with her executive team gathered around her, all talking over each other, none of them producing an answer. The supplier rep was apologetic and absolutely certain it wasn't his fault. The engineers walked the trucks twice, came back understanding the individual failures, but unable to explain the pattern. 3 different parts, 3 different failure modes, 0 common cause anyone could see with the naked eye. The Donovan Group contract, their largest, worth nearly $400,000 over 18 months, the one Catherine had chased for 6 grinding months, was in jeopardy by 10 a.m. when Donovan's VP sent a curt email with the word reviewing in it. In her experience, that word meant somebody was already halfway out the door. She looked at Stan, her operations manager, 11 years with the company. A photo of his late wife on his desk. A man who never told her something she didn't want to hear unless it was truly unavoidable. "Get me Mike Harlan," she said. Stan blinked. "The mechanic from Cicero?" "Yes, Stan." Calm, precise. "The mechanic from Cicero." It's a particular failure mode, the way people default to the most credentialed voices in the room, even after those voices have clearly run out of answers. What that instinct misses is the person who spent 20 years underneath other people's machines, who knows not just how systems fail, but how they're made to fail. Catherine had enough experience to know when her credentialed people had hit the edge of what they knew, and enough experience with Mike to know his patient, physical kind of intelligence was exactly what this moment needed. Mike got there just before noon. He walked the garage without saying a word for 12 straight minutes, while Catherine and her team watched. He looked at what they'd already looked at. Then he looked at things they hadn't thought to. Then he crouched beside the engine bay of the second truck and pointed at something small and gray. "There," he said. The supplier parts weren't just defective. They were specifically defective. Manufactured to fail at one particular load threshold, in one particular sequence. Built to pass pre-deployment inspection and only reveal themselves after extended highway use. Not random, engineered, by somebody who knew Bennett's fleet specs well enough to order exactly the wrong parts in exactly the right configuration, then bury the paper trail under 2 layers of legitimate-looking documentation. "This is coordinated," Mike said, standing, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Someone inside your supply chain. Someone who knows your specs." The room went quiet the way a room goes quiet when everybody in it is recalculating the same thing at once. "How long to fix them?" Catherine asked. "Overnight," Mike said, "if I can borrow 2 of your team." She nodded once. "Done." He worked until 4 a.m. with 2 junior mechanics, the company's industrial coffee pot, in a country station out of Joliet. Fixed all 4 trucks. Documented every part number, every supplier code. Left a complete record on the workbench before the first shift even clocked in. The Donovan Group contract was saved. Catherine announced it the next morning, Mike standing beside her, still in his work clothes, grease still on his hands, and said his name clearly, no qualifiers attached. The room applauded. Mike looked at the floor the way a man does when he's genuinely uncomfortable with the attention, half suspecting it's some kind of clerical error. But that wasn't the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered came at 11 p.m. the night before, in the back of the garage. The last truck nearly finished. The junior mechanics already gone home. Catherine was sitting on an overturned parts crate with a cup of terrible coffee, watching Mike work, when she noticed he'd gone completely still. Not tired still. The particular stillness of a person who's found something they weren't looking for and needs a second to understand what it means. He came over, set down the flashlight, sat on a second crate across from her. "There's an anomaly in one of the parts boxes," he said. "Second label, under the first one. Partially peeled. Different company name underneath." He set his phone down on the crate between them, a photo on the screen. "I ran it through the Illinois Secretary of State Business Search. Public database. Takes about 2 minutes." She looked at the screen. A business registration record. Fulcrum Distribution Partners. Status, dissolved. Date, March 2021. Registered agent, Garrett L. Voss. She looked at it for a long time, without saying anything, her thumb pressed hard against the edge of the phone. "You know that name," Mike said, not a question. "David and Garrett Voss had an arrangement, starting around 2019, she said carefully. Her voice had the quality of someone walking out onto ice, testing each word before she put her weight on it. Voss believed David owed him money from a deal that was never put into a formal contract. When David died, my attorney reviewed the estate. No enforceable claim. No legal standing to collect. So he found a different way to collect, Mike said. She nodded slowly. After the estate settled, my attorney flagged that somebody had quietly acquired a small debt position against the company through a third-party broker. We never figured out who. Dismissed it as a nuisance claim. She looked at Mike. My attorney mentioned it once at a dinner last month. I didn't think about it again. Until tonight, Mike said. Until tonight. The country station played something slow from the 70s. The kind of song that lives in the background of memories you didn't know you were making. In the quiet of that garage, something unseen for years finally stepped into the light. Voss's calculation, Mike walked her through it piece by piece, was simple once you understood it. If Bennett Logistics failed publicly, the Donovan contract gone, the fleet's reliability record destroyed, the company's market value would crater. Forcing a restructuring, Voss was positioned to exploit through his third-party debt position. He didn't need a courtroom. He needed a collapse. He's been patient, Mike said. This has been building a long time. Catherine looked off into the middle distance for a moment. David may have known, she said quietly, about how Voss operated. He may have known exactly what kind of man he was getting into business with. A pause. He never told me. He never told me anything about that side of things. I'm the one who built this company after he died, and he never once thought to warn me about what he might have left behind. She said it without any melodrama, just clearly. The way a person finally names something that's been living nameless in a dark room for too long. There's a specific kind of grief that doesn't have a formal name, the grief of the revised story. When new evidence shows up and forces you to go back through the years and reread all of it with different eyes. It isn't the same as losing someone. In some ways it's harder, because that grief has no shape to it, no ceremony. You just sit in a garage at midnight and feel the floor shift underneath a house you thought was solid. Catherine sat with that shifting, and she did not collapse under it. Both things were true at once. David had diminished her and kept things from her that now threatened her daughters and everything she'd built. And also, she had loved him, and the girls had lost their father. And Bennett Logistics was hers, built on her own labor, and no ghost signature on some registration document could ever take that from her. Holding both at once, the grief and the groundedness, that was the hardest kind of truth. No resolution to it. Only a decision to carry it without letting it carry her. From the far end of the garage came quiet footsteps. Harris, the senior loading dock coordinator, 11 years with the company, a man Catherine had always trusted, walked over and stopped in front of Mike. His expression was steady, careful. The look of a man who's been close enough to something to understand its shape. I'd be careful, Harris said quietly, about how deep this goes. Mike held his eyes. I appreciate that. Harris nodded once and walked back toward the far end of the garage. Catherine watched him go. He knows something, she said. He knows enough to be scared, Mike said, which means whoever's running this isn't afraid of being looked at. They're only afraid of being found by the right person. A pause. And by now, they know somebody's looking. He said it evenly, but Catherine heard what was sitting underneath it. Because what neither of them said out loud, what sat between them in that quiet garage like a third person at the table, was this. The trucks were never the real target. The trucks had just been practice. And the next move was already in motion. The storm hit on a Thursday night. The National Weather Service had been calling for it since Wednesday, and by Thursday afternoon, the Chicago Metro had that collective stillness that settles in when people have already stocked up on bread and rock salt, watching the sky the way their grandparents used to, not on a phone, with their own eyes. By 9 p.m., the snow was coming sideways across I-90. The Illinois DOT issued a Level 2 alert for Cook and DuPage counties. Catherine had called her fleet manager at 8 and told him to hold every truck. One was already out, a long-haul run to Indianapolis that left before the alert went up. Driver named Marcus Webb, 20 years with the company. The call came at 10:38 p.m. Marcus had gone off the road on I-90, past Oak Park. Guardrail impact. Conscious, cold, the door pinned shut. Ambulance on the way, but the access ramp was icing fast. Catherine stood in her Lincoln Park kitchen, phone in hand. Sophia and Isabella asleep upstairs, their shoes lined up by the back door in the order Sophia had decided was the rule. Hers on the left, Isabella's on the right. She felt that tearing, impossible thing, being responsible for a man hurt on a highway and 2 sleeping children who needed her home. She called Mike. He answered before the second ring. He drove into the storm the way he drove everything difficult. Both hands on the wheel, eyes reading the road 100 feet ahead, the tow truck's rattling heater cranked all the way up. Before he left the shop, he made one call. To Darlene. She picked up on the third ring, groggy at first, then instantly focused, the way a woman gets when she's raised 3 kids and never quite lost her emergency gear. "I might need you tonight," Mike said, "depending what I find." "I'll keep my coat by the door," Darlene said. "No questions. No negotiating. Just that." He found Marcus 20 minutes later, the semi tilted up against the guardrail on the shoulder of I-90, hazards blinking orange through the blowing snow. Marcus was conscious, talking. Mike got a cable hooked to the undercarriage in 8 minutes, working fast in the wind and the cold. Then the guardrail section gave way. It happened the way accidents happen, fast, then horrifyingly slow. The section failed completely. The retaining bolts sheared clean through, not from impact alone, Mike would understand that part later, but weakened deliberately. Prepared in advance by someone who'd known the route, checked the forecast, and built the whole scene like a set piece. The cab lurched hard to the right. Mike got Marcus clear of the door. That part he got completely right, no hesitation at all. The shifting weight of the cab caught his left leg against the guardrail post, and his right shoulder against the cable housing. A sharp pain he registered and set aside, methodically, the way he'd trained himself to, as if pain were just information to log and deal with later. He lay in the median in the blizzard and told Marcus, calm as anything, to stay on the shoulder and wait for the ambulance. His leg was badly bruised, his shoulder strained. He could still walk, slowly, with the grim deliberateness of a man who's already decided he's walking regardless of what his body's recommending. He had one good arm, an automatic transmission, and a tow truck with the heat working. He called Darlene from the shoulder while the state trooper wrote up the incident report. "I need you to meet me at Catherine Bennett's address," he said. "I'm sending you the address now. Bring your Buick. I'll explain when I get there."
"Already putting on my coat,"
Darlene said. At 11:52 p.m., Catherine's phone rang, Illinois State Police. She answered and stood very still while the trooper explained what had happened on I-90, that Mike Harlan had recovered the vehicle, that he'd been hurt, that he'd declined hospital transport. At 11:55, a second call came through. Unknown number. Something made her pick it up. A voice. Male. Unhurried. The flatness of a man who's already thought through exactly what he wants to say and sees no reason to rush it. "Ms. Bennett, you should tell your man from Cicero the safety report he filed was a mistake. We know his name. We know yours. The next incident won't involve a truck." The line went dead. She stood in the kitchen, heart slamming once, hard, against her ribs, and understood 2 things. First, whoever was behind this had a contact inside State Police Dispatch, or inside her own company, somebody who'd seen Mike's safety report within hours of him filing it. Second, they'd used both names, his and hers, which meant they'd been watching closely enough to connect the 2 of them, and had decided threatening the person she cared about was a more efficient move than threatening trucks. Sophia's shoe sat on the left, Isabella's on the right. Catherine had spent years staying quiet when she should have spoken up, folding herself small to keep a peace that was never really peaceful, changing tires in the rain, telling no one when the floor dropped out beneath her. She'd called that wisdom once, or strategy, or love, depending on the year. She was done calling it any of those things. She called Darlene. "Are you at the house?" "Pulling up now," Darlene said. "Both girls still asleep. I'll have them in the Buick in 5 minutes." "Thank you," Catherine said. "Honey," Darlene said, with the matter-of-fact warmth of a woman who's spent decades holding other people's families together. "That's what neighbors are for." Catherine got to Mike's house in Cicero at 12:40 a.m. Darlene's tan Buick already parked out front. Darlene herself in Mike's kitchen with a cup of tea she'd found and made without being asked, because that's the kind of woman she was. Mike sat at the kitchen table, left leg propped on a chair, right arm in a sling made out of a dish towel. A mug of cold coffee in front of him, his good arm couldn't quite reach across the table for. Tyler was asleep on the couch under every spare blanket in the house. Catherine went down the hallway, looked into Tyler's room. Sophia and Isabella, both girls asleep in Tyler's bed. Sophia with one arm flung over the side, her usual sprawl. Isabella curled up small and still, her face smooth, completely at rest. The backpack, for once, nowhere near her hands. Catherine stood in the doorway of that small bedroom in Cicero, Illinois, in a house that smelled like motor oil and grape-scented kids' shampoo and Darlene's tea, and she understood, with total clarity, exactly what had happened. Her chest tightened, eyes stinging, injured, alone. In a blizzard, on a night any reasonable person would have gone straight home and locked the door. And Mike Harlan had called Darlene anyway, arranged for her daughters to get picked up, made sure they were settled before he even sat down to deal with himself. Not because anyone asked him to, not because there was any obligation hanging over him, because two little girls who'd already lost one person they counted on shouldn't have to spend a frightening night wondering where they were. She walked back to the kitchen, sat down across from him. Darlene quietly picked up her tea and slipped into the living room without being asked, because Darlene understood things without needing them spelled out. Mike looked at Catherine with that patient, sad-eyed look of his and didn't say, "It's okay." Didn't say, "Don't cry." Didn't reach for any of the words people grab to make crying stop faster. He just let her. Because some things deserve to be wept over without anyone trying to talk you out of it. "You called Darlene," she said, once she could speak evenly again. "She keeps her coat by the door," he said. She looked at him across the kitchen table. "Who are you?" she said. Not dramatic, genuine. Like the question had been building for weeks and finally found its way out. He thought about it. "Just somebody who didn't want them to be scared," he said. She sat with that for a long moment and understood, with the kind of clarity that only ever shows up at 1 in the morning, that Mike had already made a decision she didn't know about yet. One that had nothing to do with trucks or shell companies. One about what he was willing to lose to keep the people in this small house safe. When she found out what it would be her turn to choose, he told her the next morning. The girls were still asleep. Tyler ate his cereal in the focused silence of a 6-year-old who'd assessed the situation and decided 2 extra kids in his house was an acceptable, maybe even favorable, development. Darlene had gone home at dawn. Mike sat across from Catherine, arm in a proper sling now, leg propped up, and told her what he'd done in the hours before she ever showed up. He'd found the last piece of evidence. Buried in the supplier filings, a notarized document with Garrett Voss's signature on it, tying the shell company to the sabotage and to a string of financial transactions that predated David's death. Taken together, it all showed Voss had been planning this for years, waiting to move against a company whose founding debt he considered, in his own twisted math, his own. Everything proving Voss's hand in it. The shell company trail, the supplier records, the parts labels, the safety report, the spiral notebook, All of it had already gone to a Chicago attorney named Paul Garrett the previous afternoon. He was preparing a formal referral to the FBI. It was done. Voss would be investigated. That thread was in the right hands now. But there was a second category of documents. Mike set 5 pages on the kitchen table between them. "These are financial records from 2019, he said. "They suggest David knew about Voss's methods when he went into business with him. Not proof of a crime, nothing conclusive, but enough to be damaging if it ever became part of a public proceeding." He looked at her steadily. "These aren't mine to submit, and they aren't mine to destroy. They're yours. You decide." Catherine looked at the 5 pages for a long time, fingers hovering just above them, not touching yet. David had diminished her, made her small when she'd had every right to be large. He'd kept things from her that were now reaching back through his own death to threaten their daughter's safety and the company she'd built with her own 2 hands. All of that was true. And also he was Sophia and Isabella's father. Gone. Complicated, imperfect, but theirs. Whatever he'd done, he couldn't answer for it now. And his daughters, who'd already lost him once, didn't need to lose him a second time. Not in a headline, not in a legal filing, not with the words questionable dealings stitched permanently onto the name they carried. Catherine picked up the 5 pages. She held them a moment, then folded them carefully and slid them into the inside pocket of her jacket. Not to burn, not to submit, to carry, for now, until she figured out what to do with the weight of a complicated man she'd loved imperfectly and grieved truly. "The press conference is Friday," she said. Mike started to say something. "It's simple," she said. "I'm going to confirm that Bennett Logistics cooperated fully with an independent investigation into supply chain fraud, that the matter's been referred to federal authorities, and that the investigation was led by Mike Harlan of Cicero, Illinois, a veteran, a mechanic, and the most trustworthy person I've ever worked with in this industry." She held his eyes. Clean, factual, true. He looked at her for a moment. "That works," he said. "Good," she said. Then, quieter, "You could have walked away from any of this. After the first truck, after the garage, definitely after the highway." A pause. "Why didn't you?" He thought about it honestly. "Because Tyler is watching what I do," he said. "And I want him to see you don't walk away from people who need help just because things get complicated. That's not the kind of father I want to be. Not the kind of man I want him to grow up into." From the hallway came the sound of small feet, Sophia, constitutionally incapable of waking up quietly, and then Tyler's voice. "You want the purple bowl or the blue bowl?" Sophia, immediately and decisively, "Purple." Then Isabella, soft and clear, steadier than she'd sounded in months. "I want purple too." And Tyler, after a brief and solemn pause, "Okay, I'll use the blue one." Mike and Catherine looked at each other across the kitchen table in the small house in Cicero, Illinois. Outside, the last of the storm clouds pulled east toward Indiana. The alley sat white and still. The spiral notebook sat closed on the shelf above the workbench, its work finished, a record of everything one quiet man had seen and chosen to do something about anyway, written in the dark when nobody was watching. This story is a reminder that the people who protect us without being asked, without applause, are rare. Not because kindness itself is rare, but because that particular kind of courage costs something real. It means accepting loss to hand someone else safety. It means driving into blizzards. It means passing the breadbasket to a frightened child simply because that's quietly who you are. That's not weakness, not luck either. It might be the most ordinary and extraordinary thing a person can do. Who in your life has protected you without ever making a sound about it? Have you told them so? "You lost so much because of us," she whispered. "I only did what a father should do," he said. Outside, the snow had settled. The alley sat still. The five of them sat together in that small house in Cicero, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like exactly enough. Behind every viral, tear-jerking script is a human heart that felt pain, hope, and injustice first. AI was merely a helpful assistant in shaping the words, so the message of empathy and courage could reach wider audiences.